But without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Ayu Abdullah from COMET. She'll share their work on participatory data-driven planning tools and how these are helping communities at the last mile achieve real economic growth by matching demand with productive use energy systems. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. So, my name is Ayu, and I am the co founder and managing director for a mission driven enterprise, which we call COMET or Community Energy Toolkit. Everyone's done such a beautiful job at helping set up the the issue and the topic that I'm going to do this slightly differently than I had initially envisioned. So I'm actually going to try and take you through maybe a narrative of why our tool actually exists. Um, so Comet or Community Energy Toolkit actually came out of a nonprofit organization called Energy Action Partners that has been operating for over a decade. We came out of this nonprofit because Energy Action Partners does primarily energy access, community energy across different regions. And we recognized very early on um, as a nonprofit organization that one key element in deploying projects on the ground that was already mentioned here this morning and that we all kind of recognize, those of us working in the space, is how do you actually engage communities meaningfully? And you can deploy all the technology you want. You can design all the best delivery models, have all the right financing in place. But if you don't have community buy in, community cooperation, and just the community just doesn't understand the value of your systems fail, right? This is across the board, and we see this a lot, which is kind of why we're not on track to hit SDG 7, right? We need over 200,000 mini grids, for example, to hit 100%, and we're nowhere close to that. So Comet was basically designed to be a community engagement simulation software. So we built out a virtual simulation of an energy system, and we take it into communities and run focus group discussions and workshops around mini grid topics. Um, we use this primarily for design and development. So, for example, we run scenarios of mini grid systems with communities where we try and identify things like what kind of demand is the community really interested in? What type of productive use are they going to use on the system? What kind of tariffs are acceptable for communities? And all these design requirements and issues which make it difficult if you don't have that information beforehand, right, before you implement systems. Conventionally, we do this through a lot of surveys, questionnaires, engagement with community in terms of focus group discussions. But these are quite challenging to do with communities that are under electrified and don't have strong experience or an understanding of energy systems. If this is the first time that they're coming into contact with an energy system. So that's kind of why we designed the simulation software. So this is used within the context of energy access primarily. Um, we've used it for a lot of mini grid development, a lot of mini grid communities actually, and we run, like I said, like we run these different workshop modules. We run it in this setting so that it's interactive. Communities get to experience, what it's like to run different appliances. We walk them through these different scenarios where we try to really elicit what exactly is important to the community, what appliances are key, and like I mentioned earlier, what type of ability and willingness to pay do they really have? And these conversations really help them to fully understand the value of it to them. And it usually changes their understanding of electricity so that when they tell you, this is what I'm willing to afford, this is what I'm willing to pay, this is what I can afford, and these are the appliances that I'm going to select, these are coming from a place of informed decision making, right? Because they've experienced it through this simulation, they've had these discussions as a community, they've they've shared a lot of back and forth with each other in terms of what's possible for their community. We also run all female workshops, so we have a gender perspective where we get to really understand as well different uses and appliances that women want that are different from maybe if you were to ask the whole entire community. So the workshop process using a software tool like Comet is also able to include different groups of people that normally it would be kind of difficult to tease out what their aspirations and their needs are. So what this looks like in practice, um, we've run it in over 100 communities now. Most of them are actually in the Pacific, but also across Southeast Asia, and East Africa. The software is currently on local machines, so we take in a computer and tablets, and they're all networked. So each tablet acts like a connection. It can be either a household connection, an institutional connection, or a productive use connection. And they buy appliances. They basically walk themselves through a virtual mini grid setup. We've run it, I mean, this is all without electricity. So we've run it in very remote, challenging places, as you can see, mountains, islands across the region. So what we are able to do is really build out demand profiles before implementation. We focus a lot as well on PUE, so productive use of energy, so that we can build in livelihoods into the system and turn a lot of these aspirations into actual data that we can use for system design and implementation. So just as an example, um, we've run it in Nepal with UNDP there and AEPC, if any of you are familiar with the Nepal mini grid context. And Nepal is a country that has scaled mini grids, right? They have over 3,000 mini grids. But these are all first generation mini grids, so they've been implemented decades ago. The next stage of these mini grids, government wanted to basically increase productive use and clean cooking. And so COMET was sent in to basically assess where the mini grids are currently, but what's the potential for clean cooking. And they had a target, they had a policy target of they needed 10% additional demand that's coming from clean cooking. And so COMET was sent in to see whether this was possible. And so we ran different scenarios with, I think it was over 5 different communities. And we ran scenarios where, okay, your current usage, and then a scenario with clean cooking appliances in the simulations. And we were able to get this increased demand and potential additional load profiles from the communities that were primarily coming from clean cooking. And so this was then given to AEPC, and government now has a better idea and of the policies that they can set, and what are some of the interventions that will also support that policy in terms of appliance financing. This is an example of a project that we are currently running in Malaysia, so closer to here and to home where I'm from. We've got a cluster of communities there, about 4 communities, where COMET was used very early on in the early stages of community engagement, where we were very intentional about including productive use of energy in these demand profiles. We saw an increase in terms of excitement, enthusiasm, cooperation from the communities. And we saw the difference between communities that had COMET and have not used COMET. And we're still actually currently working on some evidence building around doing surveys and questionnaires to really measure some of that impact. But basically, these communities are already within 6 months of implementation of the systems, already have productive use set up. And I think if any of you have worked in mini grids, you would know that that's a pretty big challenge in terms of how to encourage productive use. But in these communities, each one has already set up a business hub, and one of them already has 4 operational businesses all around cold storage. One has a hair salon, which is really interesting for a rural remote community, and a sundry shop, and another has a youth-led enterprise where they do printing and photocopying. So pretty exciting in terms of how quickly we were able to see that implementation of the businesses. The other thing that's really useful about Comet is also it's really used all throughout the project cycle. A lot of the impact is clear and can be seen when you use it early on in project feasibility or planning stages. But there's use for Comet and use cases for it to be used all throughout the project cycle to ensure that communities are able to give their input and understand what's happening with the project, and then they can make full use of it. So to date, we've run Comet in over 100 communities. The most recent deployments are actually not on this map. They're actually in the US, in the state of Arizona with the Hopi Reservation. There's about still over 35,000 unelectrified connections there. And Comet was used in feasibility studies. Uh, we've got a partner who's actually been using Comet for feasibility studies at scale. So as an example of that, it was used 2 years ago in Fiji, which is where those dots are, and it was used in 75 mini-grids, potential mini-grid sites to do feasibilities over the course of 6 months. And that was an example, that was a real demonstration of how they were able to scale the use of Comet and use it in planning stages where it really reduced the costs of planning, because otherwise they would have had to do household surveys. Each community would take a couple days, but with Comet, they were able to do one community one day, just gather them, do workshops, gather data because it's a software. All of that data is already digital, and you get immediate load profiles that can then be used for design and planning. I think that's where I'm going to end, and happy to have any questions later on. But just as an example of how I suppose technology innovation doesn't just come in the form of generation or distribution. Sometimes it comes from the demand side, and how do you innovate engaging communities? And we would really welcome more innovation in this space as well, because we all recognize that that's a gap, and we know that that's the difficult part. Um, but we need to see more innovation in this specific space. Thank you.